Alright, good morning everybody. Welcome to another video with Carnal. Now, this video is going to be on a particularly strange topic because I don't agree entirely with classical liberals, and I don't exactly see eye to eye with what you would call the Dark Enlightenment people. And the reason that I'm making this is to clarify my position on certain things like natural rights versus pretty much everything else. And the reason that I have to disagree with the Enlightenment notion of natural rights is because the presumption is, of course, that natural rights are things that you inherently possess independent of any other body, yet paradoxically are required to be enforced by a central government, a central force which protects these human rights that you claim to possess, or that the philosophy claims that you innately possess. As is obvious, that doesn't make them natural in any way, shape, or form. Now, if you don't have natural human rights, what do you actually have to have an ideological protection from predation and abuse? Well, as it just so turns out, in Scripture we find an honest answer in the examples given in both Old and New Testament. Now, the concept which we're going to be talking about is called covenant, or covenants. A covenant is essentially a two-way agreement. If this, then I receive that from the other party. Now, in Scripture, God sets the terms for the covenant, and you either agree or do not enter into the covenant. That's pretty much the stronghold version of what the covenant is. However, the ethos of the covenant is different from the concept of natural human rights, because the covenant is something that is acknowledged to be outside of nature, and therefore is something that has to be consistently striven for rather than assumed to be possessed. It is never assumed that you are the member of the covenant. You have to exude the qualities of someone who is possessing of the covenant. You have to behave a certain way. You have to adopt certain attitudes, certain practices to be considered part of the covenant. You have to be part of a certain bloodline, so on and so forth. And even if you are born into the bloodline, you are expected to behave in a certain manner. This is the nature of what a covenant is. Now, the reason why this idea, this way of thinking, has been trivialized and downplayed by the Enlightenment is because we assumed, erroneously, that the consequences of living under a covenant lifestyle were inherent to human nature, that they were inherent into our human condition, and that it was through fleshing out these expectations of covenant life that we could expect them to be called natural. And they're not. That's the ironic thing, is throughout the what you could call the Enlightenment, from a result of the Dark Ages and from the times of the primitive church, there became a sentiment from the widening influence of Christianity that the Christian ethos was human nature. That is incorrect. It is not human nature to adopt the Christian ethos. That is a pipe dream. The Christian ethos is not maintained by virtue of being the natural state of man. The Christian ethos is maintained by acknowledging correctly a Semitic notion, an ancient Semitic notion, that you are a part of a covenant, that you are part of a contract, that you are part of a continuum of tradition, practices, and sentiments. That is what it means to be part of the covenant. And this idea that we have broken it down into an a priori statement has been much of the reason of our misunderstanding about the human condition today. What we assume is standard is not standard. Human rights, again, are not standard. Your way of life, your quality of living, and all such things are not the result of an innate nature. They are parts of being a part of a covenant, and what we are having trouble with, and there is a tendency to think of this as a racial paradigm as well as a cultural one, is that it's is that it is cultural rather than simply covenantal. You entered into a contract in Western society. That is part of the covenant. Now, we in the West have, again, erroneously made the stupid mistake of thinking that everyone who joined us was going to be natural stakeholders in this covenant. They're not. They have to be assimilated. They have to be initiated. They have to be proven. And they have to be held to account to the standards of the covenant. And that's the thing about the covenant, is it is conditional. It is particular. It is a particular mode of morality. It is not universal in any way, shape, or form. And that's another aspect that we need to acknowledge and come to terms with. The human rights that we claim to be standard are not. They are conditional. They are not universal. Whether or not you would like to be treated with the Western standard of living is irrelevant to where someone from a non-Western society is going to treat you that way. Because they likely won't. And just as much as they don't want to behave that way when they come over to the West, well, the West needs to enforce the covenant, rather than presume that these individuals are worthy of its protection and blessing. And that is the primary difference, or that is the nature of our situation. This this confusion. Because we have to come to terms with the fact that our way of life, our standards, our assumptions about what human rights are not rights at all. They are blessings from entering into a covenant of Western philosophy and way of life. And we need to go back to Scripture to discover this, unironically. And so those are the thoughts I wanted to share with you all, because here's the thing. I am not in the camp of most mainstream Christianity. I do not make the gross mistake of thinking of the laws of God as somehow equivalent to the Greek philosophers of old. I don't think that. I do not equate the God of the Bible to the Trinitarian notion of being somehow one and the same with the Greek good. I don't make that mistake. The God of the Bible has nothing to do with the Greek good. I find that Semitic doctrine, as revealed in Scripture, and the pagan pedophile philosophy of the Greeks, I must separate the two. And I do find Semitic doctrine to be superior to Greek philosophy in every way, shape, and form. And one of the main reasons for that is because in no point in the Semitic doctrine would we have ever made the gross injustice of allowing a prostitute to not be judged for murdering someone because of her beauty. And this literally happened. There's a case in ancient Greece, in ancient Greek, where a prostitute, a courtesan, a very famous courtesan, was tried for murder, and she was obviously guilty. And in her defense, her attorney, in essence, revealed her top, revealed her bosom, revealed her breasts, and said, "Would the gods want you to kill the bearer of such beauty and such perfect tits?" Unironically, he did this. And because beauty was a virtue of the good, they had to concede his point. She had to be allowed to live because of her innate beauty. Because beauty is part of the good. And therefore, it would be a crime to let her die. That was her defense. And because of Greek philosophy, it worked. Now, I don't have to contrast that to Semitic doctrine, to the laws, to the Levitical laws found in the Old Testament. That shit simply would not have flown. So I make a distinction. I must make a distinction between the Greek philosophy thought and Semitic doctrine. They are two distinct modes of thinking, and I do not conflate the two. And I do hold Semitic doctrine to be superior. That is all. Stay carnal and God bless everyone. Bye-bye.